Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for joining us on what is one of the most highly anticipated debates of this term's lineup. It is an absolute pleasure to host a debate on what I can only describe as a controversial topic. And with us are four people who are going to do their very best to persuade you that their perspective is the right one. May I introduce, on my right, Alexis Powell from the Lewes Green party. Sitting next to him, Alan Rue, from a resident of Balcombe. And then over here we have Ed Mead from the University of Sussex Labour Party Society. Try saying that one after a few drinks. And then next to him is Mary Mears, the former leader of the Brighton and Intercity Council. I'm going to briefly remind everyone of the rules of debate because there are some faces who I haven't seen here before. Speakers will have 5 minutes to talk, during which point it would be wonderful if you guys could listen and save up your questions for the next part, where you guys get a chance to put any questions directly to them. Questions will be limited to a minute, and responses will be limited to a minute and a half. So try to keep things concise. I'd remind everyone again about the rules of participation. Keep things respectful, don't be overtly racist, and we'll all get on just fine. Thank you very much, guys. Or racist full stop, indeed. So the first speaker is Mr. Ed Mead, if you'd join me in welcoming him.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is no exaggeration to say that we're here today because we stand at a crossroads in history. A crossroads where we're going to have to decide how we're going to fuel our global energy addiction. Energy consumption is soaring. It's predicted to rise in excess of 50% over the next 30 years. 85% of this increase being driven by the developing economies. Time is not on our side. That's not to say we should be accepting any proposal with open arms but deaf ears. This isn't about taking a blind leap of faith, but a measured, calculated step forward. Unfortunately, this debate has been polluted by those who seek to use hydraulic fracking as an opportunity to further their own agendas. The fact that 3 of the 4 panellists invited here today, and I include myself in this, have been plucked from the world of politics is sadly reflective of that. No matter what side of the debate you find yourself on, I implore you to argue for greater transparency and allow a voice to be given not to the politicians, but to the experts. This debate should be about weighing up environmental risks and costs with economic benefit, necessity and opportunity. You've all seen the statistics. You know roughly how much shale gas they reckon lies beneath Lancashire and Yorkshire alone. If we can tap into 10% of this, says David Cameron, that's 51 years of gas. It will reduce our dependency on energy imports from abroad, making us less vulnerable to external shocks and bringing us just that little bit closer to self-sufficiency, creating tens of thousands of jobs in the process. According to the European Commission, emissions from electricity generated by shale gas are 2 to 10% lower than electricity generated from pipeline gas located in Russia, where a lot of our gas currently comes from. It could save us money. Even some of the more conservative estimates suggest that bills could fall by as much as 10%, while others dream of replicating the situation in the States, where bills have literally tumbled. Now, I've looked long and hard at the criticisms levied at the US fracking companies. Allegations of water contaminations and cover-ups should rightly make us uncomfortable. All these criticisms have one thing in common: a lack of transparency, an unwillingness to engage the public and even, in some cases, the government on issues of significant importance. That's not good enough. For example, in the US, companies have been reluctant to reveal some of the hundreds of chemicals they've been pumping into the earth in their search for shale gas. That's not acceptable. But we mustn't be short-sighted. There must be a better way. Already it's encouraging to see some of the UK companies reveal the chemicals they'll be using. Some companies in the United States use in excess of 750 different chemicals. Quadrilla plan to use just 4. However, activists will argue the problem doesn't end there, because a significant amount of water comes back up as returned water. In the US, this is stored in open pits before being processed. In the United Kingdom, these pits will have to be covered and tested by the Environment Agency, and they're being treated subject to some of the world's toughest environmental regulations. These safeguards are good, but the public is still divided. And it's also good that people are expressing so much concern about wasting water and the chemicals we pump into our earth. So let me paint a quick picture for you. Imagine there's a landowner who becomes obsessed with keeping his field as green as possible. So obsessed, in fact, that every year he services his field with enough water to supply a small town, using 7 times more chemical treatment per hectare than an industrial farm, regularly pumping the ground full of herbicides, potentially cancerous pesticides and colouring agents, despite allegations of water contamination. Now, what do you think the reaction to this would be? The public would be outraged, surely, or at least inquisitive. Well, what I just described was the process that goes into tending your average 18-hole golf course. So yes, it's good that water contamination is being taken seriously, but let's ask ourselves why we've let countless other industries get away with it for as long as they have, and what we'll learn from this, and how we're going to minimise the risks looking into the future. People rightly point out that fracking is a temporary solution to a long-term problem. Yes, so is coal power, so is oil-based petrol. So I would argue that if you have the opportunity to reduce your dependence on dirty temporary fixes with a cleaner one, then we should at least give it some serious consideration. I'll finish with this. We mustn't trick ourselves into thinking this is going to be an easy ride. We mustn't be blinded by the opportunities, nor intimidated by the risks. There are some legitimate concerns, and these must be adequately addressed. Public support, rightly, has to be earned, but I'm confident that with full transparency, rigorous monitoring and the correct regulation, hydraulic fracturing could revolutionise the UK's energy market in a way that is far more socially and environmentally responsible than what we've seen in the United States. I believe our responsibility to humankind's continued progress demands it of us, and that's why I urge you to vote in favour of today's proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for that impassioned speech. I would like to welcome Andrew to... sorry, my apologies. Alan, to continue the debate. Alan.
Okay. Do you feel especially lucky today, all of you sitting here? Greetings, by the way. Do you feel lucky? Well, okay. If you do, you may not worry much about the current push to fracture rocks thousands of feet beneath our feet here in Sussex, so that we can use fossil fuels long buried by geological processes. Now, the odds are about 11 million to 1 you'll die in a plane crash, yet flying is seen somehow as risky. But they become insignificant compared to the huge risks in fracking technology and from climate change. Now, we're fortunate in that just a couple of days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concludes there is a 1 in 2, not 1 in 11 million, 1 in 2 chance that global temperatures will exceed 4 degrees centigrade this century if carbon emissions are not curbed. Remember that half that rise takes us into the real danger of irreversible global temperature change. So governments must act quickly, if we want to avoid a catastrophe. But we ignore these risks. The government forbids agencies even assessing a local fracking option to consider climate change. It's ruled out. Just as if protesters at Balcombe make a song and dance about what's happening to their area, sorry, no consultation going to be allowed. By February, that is. On climate change grounds alone, these hydrocarbons must stay in the ground. Now, if you want a realistic option for energy development, and that's what our friend Ed was suggesting, then please note the recent evaluation of offshore resources. It found that if government did invest in offshore wind, wave and tidal, it would be practical to harness 29% of these resources, renewable resources, by 2050. And this would give us huge amounts of electricity so that we would become a net exporter, and we would have hundreds of thousands of jobs, not just a few tens of thousands of labouring jobs. So if you went that route, there's no need to clobber the climate to keep lights burning. The motion before you today depends on the viability of an option. Now, I've never seen an option, I don't know what it looks like. And I'm not joking, because we're not dealing with simply a table in an engineer's or economist's computer. What we're dealing with are real life processes. Processes in communities, about livelihoods, processes going on under the ground and on the earth. Fracking is in fact far more than about cracking rock. It's a process with an environmental and industrial legacy which will unfold over decades, and also with a distinct narrative waiting to be told about which people got screwed and which people got huge profits. I'm just going to use one illustration. I'm not going to go into all the impacts, air, water, scarcity and so on. I'm going to just concentrate on water pollution. Although the industry here talks about concrete and steel in well casings, and we're assured by government, oh yes, it's all really safe, we all know that human structures don't live forever. 1% of such wells are known to fail in the first year, and 30% will fall in the first 10 years. Once you drill the holes and you've got gas and other contaminants flowing, there's a risk. You've created a pathway for the migration of deep pollutants. At Balcombe, you have heavily faulted rocks. It's a sort of concave, right? And so all the faults go up. Once you drill down, these faults result in misaligned rock strata as the drill goes through. Fault leaks develop. Capping and cementing drill holes may give temporary protection, but what about the long term? I have two main concerns. One is the industrialisation of our countryside. It's not just what goes on in one hole. It's a whole number of holes, a whole number of paths connected by lots of pipes and by lots of traffic. We were told, oh, Quadrilla, 60 lorries, that's all we're going to send you a week. It turned out to be 120. Oops, they'd forgotten. One lorry going in means a lorry going out. Planning, rubbish. There's no planning conditions that they adhere to. The noise has been really excessive. And finally, I want to point to the affront to democracy. The government is told you must speed up so that you can get permissions through within a couple of weeks. And that means crushing any attempt towards localism, which I thought this government said it was about, just as it said it was about green government, but it's not. Sure.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Alan, got it right this time, hopefully my track record will continue, for his impassioned speech, and I would like to invite Mary to take the stand.
Hello everybody, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm actually a substitute for Simon Kirby at MP, so there you go, but I'm really delighted to be here. As a previous leader of the Brighton Hove City Council, sustainability and other issues were very, very high on our agenda. So I just want to go through some of the facts and then just make some observations for you. Shale gas is a new potentially energy resource which could reduce our reliance on imported gas and help lower household energy bills. It could create thousands of jobs, bring in billions of tax revenue, and secure energy supply for the future, keeping energy costs low for households and businesses. We know world markets are dominated by Russia and the Arab states. In the world market, China has far greater buying power than we do. We are hostage to fortune. The government is clear that shale gas production should not be at the expense of boosting the UK's renewable technologies and our wider environmental aims. The policy has been deeply and thoroughly considered following extensive consultation and study of the latest scientific research available. It is clear that any fracking operation must be safe and must not be at the expense of local communities or their environment. The UK has a strong regulatory system which provides a comprehensive and fit-for-purpose regime for exploration and is continually being improved. To support this aim, new controls and requirements are being introduced including prior reviews and fracking plans to address any potential risks. A new Office of Unconventional Gas and Oil will focus on the regulation of exploration. There are strict regulations in place to prevent water contamination. One I know is an issue that comes up many, many times. The release of substance into groundwater is regulated by the Environmental Agency. The Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, Ed Davey, requested a study on potential greenhouse gas emissions from shale gas extraction. The report by the Department of Energy and Climate Change Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor David Mackay, Fellow of the Royal Society, and Dr. Timothy Stone, Senior Advisor to the Secretary of State, concludes that with the right safeguards in place, the net effect of greenhouse gas emissions from fracking will be relatively small and the practice is comparable with the UK's climate changes. Latest estimates show, and these are facts, I mean that is a government paper that you will all have seen, but actually there's more to this debate that really needs to be highlighted, and it's about how you go forward and how you take your thinking around this. I mean, there's some latest information around important facts. There are 1.3 trillion cubic feet of shale gas laying underneath Brighton at the moment, and that study only covers 11 counties. And to put that into context, if we exact just a tenth of that figure, there is still equivalent to 51 years of gas supply. Shale gas, as we know, and the estimates show that they're small, the size of a cricket pitch. But interestingly enough, and I think this has perhaps got lost in a lot of the debates, there are similar types of drillings that have been taking place for decades in this country without any real protest. The South Downs National Park remains one of the most beautiful parts of Britain, yet it has been home to conventional oil and gas drilling since the 80s. And I look around this audience today, and I have to tell you this, but I'm not going to tell you my age, but I'm going to tell you that I actually lived through the 3-day week. I know what it was like to not have energy, not to have light, not to have heating, and for businesses not to be able to have their staff in and lose money. It was a horrendous time in this country, and for anybody here, obviously you're a lot younger than I am, if you go back in time and see the effect that had and not being able to provide energy for this country, it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And I suppose really for me it's about this is your future, your future. I'm this end of my future, but this is your future. And I really hope from this debate and from ongoing debates that you open your mind to every aspect of this debate around fracking, not just the scaremongering and the politicising on, and demonstrations. There is a much bigger point around this that you, in your future, will affect. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I would like to invite our final speaker of the evening to take the stage, Alexis Powell.
And I'm a substitute. And I'm a substitute for Caroline Lucas, so apologies for not being Caroline Lucas. I think what's happening here with fracking is that it's a sign of desperation. It's a sign that we're coming to the end of cheap oil. We're coming to the end of fossil fuels that are easily recoverable, and we're looking for really desperate, dirty fuels. And that doesn't just mean fracking of shale rock. That means coal bed methane, that means tar sands, that means drilling in the Arctic, that means drilling in national parks. It means going wherever there might be a scrap of fossil fuel that we can burn, because that's what the world's economy, principally the Western capitalist economies, want to do. They want to burn it all. And that's what we're facing with fracking. So when people tell you this is a glorious new dawn, please don't believe them. Please, I don't fly, but if I did fly, I would encourage you all to go to the States to see the damage that fracking has caused over there. I would encourage you to look at the videos from Colorado in the last month where they've had catastrophic flooding and where 1,900 fracking wells have been flooded. And there are images that you can see of chemicals being released, fracking chemicals being released because the fracking sites couldn't cope with the flooding. Now we have flooding in the UK as well, right? It's not like the US is so different. Yes, they are a bit more extreme in the sense that they're drilling thousands and thousands and thousands of wells all the time. Actually, that's the reason that gas prices have gone down in the US. Not because there's so much of it, because they're drilling thousands and thousands and thousands of wells. And that's what's keeping it alive. It's a bubble. It is a metaphor, it is a bubble, but it is also about getting bubbles out of the ground, and it's not a bubble that's going to last forever. If you look what's happening at the moment, because the price is so low, in the US they're not drilling at the moment for new fracking sites. Actually, fracking companies are finding it harder to raise funds. Having been told that they have loads and loads of money from Wall Street, actually it's all getting much more difficult right now. So this is a sign of desperation. That's the first thing I think we should all remember. Hopefully quite a lot of you have seen the film Gasland. You've seen those iconic images of taps with flames coming out of them. You may not know that people in the United States have been refused permission to talk about what they've gone through. Families, children have been made to sign documents to say they can never talk about fracking underneath their house. They've been given another house in another part of the country because there's been so much methane leakage and so many problems on their site, but they've been forced to sign documents to say that can't happen. Now, here in the UK, most of the fracking sites seem to be in Conservative Party constituencies, so that's an extraordinarily different situation that we're already facing up. But here's the thing about methane leakage. It's not just that methane is leaking out and you can set fire to taps and boom, you have a beautiful picture of a crazy industry. But methane leakage is a real risk in terms of climate change. Methane is 40 times worse as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, 40 times worse. So every time you release methane without burning it, you potentially increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere substantially. And that is what we risk with uncontrolled, certainly in the US, with a very uncontrolled regulation of the fracking industry, and it's also what we risk here. So there's a huge environment, and that's why there's a controversy at the moment about whether fracking could possibly be some sort of clean gas. I say to you, it's not a clean gas because of the methane leakage. It's not a clean gas because it's still a fossil fuel. They say it's a bridge fuel. They say, oh, it's better to burn the gas than to burn the coal. The coal is still being burnt, right? All of that gas that's being burnt in the United States, they're still burning the coal. It's being shipped around the world at cheaper prices. We're burning more of it. So in fact, even if you exclude the methane leakage issue, we're burning more coal as a result of fracking in the US. We're burning it all, right? This is not an either or. This is a problem that has environmental issues, democratic issues, it has health concern issues, it is the end of cheap fuels, it is a diversion from what we should really be doing, which is renewables and energy efficiency. That is what we should be concentrating on. Fracking is a diversion from that. It's not going to reduce gas prices in the UK. Mary, that is just, Ed Davey, Energy Secretary, will not accept that view because it's not true. We're linked up to world gas prices, well, European gas prices anyway. We will not see reduced household bills as a result of fracking. What we will see is thousands and thousands of fracking sites all over the country. Is that what we want? I don't think so. Let's concentrate on renewables and energy efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. So, we now open up the floor to questions. If you'd like to ask a question, put your hand in the air. And, fantastic, yes.
Alexis, you mentioned Gasland, but Gasland's been quite controversial in America, because have you heard of the documentary Truthland? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well basically Truthland, it's not a great documentary, but basically it says, you know the famous scene with lighting the water? Well basically that was because of methane already present there, and then they interviewed residents there and said that they were actually did that trick before fracking even began. So, would you respond to that?
So I would say that the fact that there's methane there is not a coincidence, and Gaslands is just one of quite a lot of films out there at the moment that are trying to flag up the risks of fracking. Okay, so if even one bit of Gaslands is a problem, then go watch Gaslands 2 or go and watch the 5 or 6 other fracking films, anti-fracking films that are out there at the moment. It's inevitable when you're trying to put something onto the big screen or even the TV screen that you're going to have some issues. People are going to pick it apart forever. Look what happened to An Inconvenient Truth. Because one point was off on a graph, because there was one statement that was slightly out of whack. The climate deniers spend fortunes trying to suggest that therefore Al Gore is part of the problem, that there is no such thing as climate change. Look, the whole film is out of whack. People put a lot of money into trying to disprove these things. For most of us, we're working on a shoestring. Right? We're trying to simply stand up and say, actually, just because the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are in agreement on this, just because America thinks this is a good thing, just because there seems to be an agreement among conventional forces, and particularly amongst the capitalist economy, we shouldn't stand up and say, we shouldn't just say no, that's okay. We shouldn't just let it go past.
Okay, more questions. Yes, gentleman in the blue sweater.
Alexis, can I just say it was really nice to hear your presentation. It's refreshing to hear someone speak passionately and without a piece of paper with lots of numbers on. Right. You said about an either-or situation that doesn't exist with the oil and coal. Could it not also be the case that fracking could exist as a way of getting energy, and also efforts could be concentrated on developing renewable? Whoever said that? Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think the evidence is that's not what's happening, unfortunately. There's an enormous amount of effort being spent in the Department of Energy and Climate Change on fracking and nuclear power. To me, those are two very classic diversions from what we should be spending a lot of energy on, renewables and energy efficiency. I have a lot of friends working in community energy projects, trying to do renewables on a reasonably small scale, because actually that is what the government says it wants to encourage. But it's incredibly difficult to do community energy projects in this day and age with this government in the current situation. So I'm all in favour of renewables. I'm all in favour, particularly in favour of community renewables. If you go to a country like Denmark, 20% of their electricity comes from wind, and almost every single wind farm in Denmark is a local collective. It's a cooperative. Right? That seems to me something we've completely missed over here. We get these big energy companies coming along and saying, I want to plonk 100 wind turbines in your back garden, and people don't like it. Unfortunate. So two things. One, yes, great, let's do renewables, but let's actually put the focus on renewables and not on fracking and on nuclear power. And the second thing is, the evidence from the US is not that we're using gas, even if we could argue that gas is clean, which it isn't. Even if we did, they're not just using the gas, they're using coal as well. They're burning their coal, they're selling it to the rest of the world, and it's being burnt. So it's really not an either or.
Thank you. Perhaps some questions for this side, if you've got them. Yes, lady at the back, but olive
Thank you.
jacket.
So I've just been at the Balcombe Community Protection Camp for the past 8 weeks, staying on the grass verge. And so I'd like to ask a question for this side. One is that, we keep hearing about what our government are telling us about how wonderful fracking is and how much energy it's going to provide, which actually all the research suggests isn't true. But also, why are we not having any discussions anywhere, not only just here but anywhere else, about how the corruption actually amongst the fracking situation? Because we have Lord Brown, who is the CEO of Quadrilla, who is also advising our government on the safety of fracking. This surely is a massive conflict of interest, and there's something very, very wrong with that. So when my government then starts telling me, no, fracking's fine, I don't believe them because of that, situations like that. And Mrs. Mears, when you're talking about we've been drilling for decades, that's true, but we haven't been using this method. It's not the same. There's conventional and unconventional drilling, and it's not fair to just say that it's the same thing. It's not.
Thank you for your question. I think actually, I followed the news and I saw the demonstrations going on, but I think what really needs to happen, there was no drilling, it wasn't fracking, there was drilling. My apologies, there was drilling, not fracking. My point is, and we talk about, lots of people go, we don't want nuclear, we don't want wind farms, we don't want this and we don't want that. The reality is this country has over 60 million people and growing. That is the reality of our country. The reality in this country is that we need to look at all resources. It has to be done, because what are we going to do? As I said, I'm a lot older than everybody in this room, I think, and I remember the 3-day week. I lived through that and I know the effects. So for me, it's around widening the debate, it's about understanding what's going on, and fracking isn't suggested to be the be-all and end-all. It has to be part of the debate. We have to be looking at ways that we can increase energy supplies in this country for the people that live here. That is a reality. Whatever way you want to do it, that's the reality.
Solar, wind and wave, that's 3.
Thank you. More questions. We're going to take them 2 at a time, so hands up. Yes, you, Sarah, in the grey jacket, and then you in the grey something or other. Indescribable item of clothing, I'm sorry.
This question is directed at Mead. Firstly, you mentioned that the English fracking company is only going to use 4 chemicals instead of, what was it,
around 700 according to a report documentary.
Which is better because you're using less types of chemicals, but it's the amount of chemicals, not so much the types of chemicals that are being done. And secondly, when fracking happens, when you break apart the rock, a lot of chemicals are released, including methane, as Mr. Alexis mentioned, and naturally occurring radium is released as well.
Yep. All I'm hearing from all the questions, from all the comments that have been made today, is actually almost straight through the argument I tried to make. There needs to be greater transparency. That'll deal with the allegations of corruption. There mustn't be corruption. We can't have the situation that the lady outlined earlier. Like I said, that's not good enough. But look, earlier we heard that dirty energy demand is being driven by Western capitalist economies. It's not. It's being driven by developing communist economies. If we look at China. If we look at China. Right?
Like Western capitalism has no responsibility whatsoever.
We have to appreciate.
That's the Labour Party.
We have to appreciate that 85% of the increase in energy demand is coming from developing economy. Now, do we say to them, no, you can't develop in the same way we did? You're too poor to develop. Is that what we say? No. We let them develop, and we set the standard. We set the standards for cheap, clean energy. We use all of the options at our disposal to achieve this. I'll leave it there.
Not cheap, not clean.
Okay.
Can I just make a technical point about the recoverable estimates?
No, can you save it for, we'll save it for summary speeches. Summaries at the end. Okay, great. More questions? More questions. Yes, gentleman there, followed by, followed by the lady at the front.
This is a question addressed to whoever has spoken in favour of fracking. And it's a question that nobody in the industry or associated with the industry ever addresses or answers. On the one hand, the industry says that it will produce a lot of gas and oil, and on the other hand, it never explains how many wells it would take, how much water it would take, and how much waste it would produce. And these are the points that the industry has to be a little bit more transparent about. And I suspect that neither of the people that have come this evening to speak in favour of the industry have the slightest idea how much gas will be produced by how many wells, using how much water and producing how much waste?
Okay, I can give you...
And thank you. And lady at the front.
Mine's more like a technical question. I don't know if this is a silly question. Shale gas, once you do the fracking, when it burns as a fossil fuel, does it produce CO2 just as much as coal, oil and gas?
No.
And if so, that's great. Well, it's not very great. But like, why focus on that when we need renewables? Like, forget the whole argument whether like fracking is a good thing or not. Focus on the argument of the fact that like there's climate change, like energy shortage is a fossil fuel. We need alternative energy methods.
Okay, just in response to the first question, I can't give you exact figures. Like I said, I wish we had some experts involved in this debate, not to put down any of these guys.
Well, they don't turn up, do they?
I don't know if they're invited, I wasn't involved in the planning.
They don't turn up.
Okay, well, why don't we give them a loud voice?
Clowns.
We don't create this culture of scaremongering where we keep these experts in fear of speaking out, for fear what could happen to them. Right.
Thank you, sir.
Let's talk about water consumption to start with. We can give you an estimate for how much water would be used. The Institute of Directors reckons it would be 0.05% of the UK's water supply. Okay?
That's a meaningless comment.
Okay, fine. But take it as you will. But gas provides 40% of our
Who
electricity.
paid for that study? Quadrilla paid for that Institute of
Thank you,
Directors
sir.
study. How dare you quote from the study like that? How dare you?
If you let me finish.
It's disgraceful.
Gas provides 40% of our electricity, 90% of our heating. If we've got an opportunity to bring down the cost of that with 0.05% of our water supply, then I think that's something we should be taking very seriously.
Order! Please. If you'd like to continue.
I'm okay. I hope the gentleman is satisfied.
Right, thank you. Feel a bit like a school teacher. Got a whiteboard. Right, can we have more questions? Are there any further questions? Yes, lady there, followed by the lady at the front.
Is that me?
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to go back to her question, which is the idea that we're still burning fossil fuels. And the idea is that I thought the idea is that we are trying to avoid that. Why isn't that being addressed? Why isn't that the focus?
Just we're doing certainly when and the second question.
People have always talked about the economic benefits of fracking. The thing is, even if we have a short-lived, strong economy, strong-ish, what's the use when we can't farm the land or drink the water? And a technical point that you made earlier about Gasland, there are some inaccuracies, and methane did exist in the water prior to fracking. But actually, 4 out of 5 nearby wells contain methane, and concentrations of gas in the water nearby the homes that have been fracked are far higher than any of the others. So how do you explain that?
Thank you.
So that's absolutely spot on. Fracking still means that we're going to burn fossil fuels. We're going to burn even more of them. So if you went back 10 years and said, this is the amount of recoverable fossil fuels in the world, we can probably burn 50% more of them. James Hansen, formerly of NASA and probably the leading climate scientist in the US, says actually we've reached the limit. We have to reverse the process now. We have to take carbon out of the atmosphere, not put in a bit more or a lot more as economics, classical economics would want us to. So yes, absolutely. We can't burn more. We've got to stop. We've got to keep it in the ground. There was a very hopeful initiative in Ecuador about keeping oil underground. Charities around the world, good individuals, were going to give the Ecuadorian government half the cost of the value of the fossil fuels under the Amazonian rainforest. And that seemed like a really hopeful step forward, and it's unfortunately gone out of the window. Capitalism, I don't think it's a dirty word anymore, but it's a very dirty business, is going to eat every last drop of fossil fuels unless we, that is democratic institutions, that is people that care, stand up and say no.
that was really interesting, thank you. We've sort of debated before on different things, so that's quite interesting. One of the things I wanted to say, and talking about how transparent this is and how important it is to have an open, transparent debate. I mean, I've been reading some of the House of Commons Energy and Climate Change committees. I mean, they're huge, and it goes right into the minutiae of details and questions and questions that around methane gas and different answers. I mean, if we're going to talk about methane gas in land, we know in Brighton alone there's areas in the city, park areas that have methane gas, and it's gone right across the landscape there. So it's not unknown, but it is regulated, and the part of Brighton that is regulated is monitored very carefully. And there's issues around talking about what's put into the land and the water supply. I think the scientific evidence that has come from the professors that have advised the Energy and Climate Change Minister show that there isn't any real scientific evidence that they're showing, that they're knowing. So my point is, I think this debate is wider, much wider. You can sit here today and go, yeah, I'm going to support that, no, I'm not going to support that. But as I said earlier, this is your future, and you need to look at it across the piece.
Okay, more questions from the floor. Yes, gentleman at the back in the black t-shirt, followed by the gentleman with the blue hoodie.
Yeah, thank you. We know very well that the water that goes into the wells goes in clean and comes out contaminated. We know that this roughly is 30%, sorry, that comes out of the well. And could you tell me what happens to the contaminated water when it's, and how it's treated and what happens?
Okay, I'm not sure if you're here. Sorry.
And second speaker, second question.
I was going to ask Alexis a question about, you said that if they were burning, America's burning the same amount of coal that they are before they start
being burnt. They're selling it on the world market.
Okay, so they're selling the same amount of coal that they would be if even before they did fracking.
Absolutely.
Is that just an issue of like they're just doing that for money? I think my request has changed because they're selling it rather than burning it.
So what's your question now?
So someone else asked a question.
Thank you. If you could, okay, yeah, lady at the back, with the black top.
Just that in conventional drilling, obviously we're drilling for shale gas, and one of the main things is like methane gas. In conventional drilling, methane gas is actually a byproduct, and a statistic that comes from mind is from the John Baby drill, where in North Dakota alone, enough methane is burnt as a byproduct to heat 500,000 homes because it's so expensive to compress it. And in fracking, the use of water, water will very soon become one of our most clean water. It will become one of our most, crucial and kind of valuable resources because it's very rapidly running out. So to say that fracking, it doesn't seem to be representative of the resources that are actually at stake. We're using far too much water and burning methane in other industries. It seems much more an issue of profit than an issue of resources.
Can I ask a technical question at the back? Okay,
please.
Okay. So, water that comes out of fracking sites, tar sand sites, coal bed methane sites, they go into these huge, dirty, great lakes, basically, and they sit there. And if the regulations, the local regulations are strong enough, then somebody tries to clean it up. It's not happening particularly in Canada or the US, but that's what they espouse to. Okay, so we're facing all these incredibly polluted, toxic lakes. That's what I live in Lewes. We get our drinking water from Balcombe. If you look at what's been happening in Colorado, as I mentioned before, all the floods there, they have no control over what is coming out of the fracked sites and the oil sites. Actually, it's not just about fracking. So we've got huge potential risks for us in Lewes and everybody that gets their drinking water from the Balcombe area because of the contaminated water issue. I think that's probably our biggest issue in Lewes. Yes, and absolutely, we're burning off gas all over the planet. You only have to look at a picture of the planet by night, and you see some of the biggest illuminations, some of the biggest sort of light that we're throwing out to space, is because of flaring in Nigeria, in sites that the gas and oil companies are using all around the world. And yes, you're right, we're not catching it. And instead, we're going after these processes that are far dirtier because we're desperate for more of the stuff. It's an addiction, and we've got to break it.
Do we have any further questions? Yes, lady there, followed by the gentleman in the green thing.
Okay, so I would just like to come back to democracy, because like we have heard that there are some scientific studies apparently that say that fracking is safe. There are other scientific voices that talk about the risks, like maybe you saw the info papers that Elsa put out here. There's like on the back side, there's a recent study about contamination of drinking water with methane in the US that seems quite credible to me personally. And so obviously there is a risk. The risk is there. So like who has the risk? Like the risk is with the local residents and the profit is with the company. So there's something wrong here. So why do the local residents in Balcombe, why do they have no say in what's happening?
To whom was that question directed? Sorry.
Maybe from like Balcombe, of course.
Okay.
And maybe also from the other side afterwards.
Fantastic, thank you. And gentleman with the green thing?
Okay. I understand there's premise to move towards renewable energy sources. This is for Alexis Powell. And it is definitely possible. I remember citing a specific example of a Scottish engineer in the 1970s and 1980s who nearly perfected tidal energy. But the one problem I find with it specifically, and the reason why fracking is an example of how we would attain fossil fuels, is to change over from the system we have at the moment of nuclear power, coal, gas, etc. will take a really long time with Britain out of energy. Now, I'm completely for the idea of renewable energy resources, completely, and as a move towards that in the future, it's definitely possible. But British nuclear power plants run at 95% capacity because one of the power plants is taken out. How are you going to be able to cement the problems of changing to a renewable energy source very quickly? I'm all for transitioning slowly, but to force it completely, it's quite kind of short-sighted.
Sorry, could we get a response?
Let me deal with the first question about, the risk incurred in Balcombe and why our Balcombe voice is not being heard. Because the system is designed in such a way that very little weight is attached to what local people say. For example, there were something like 800 to 900 objections to Quadrilla's extension applications when they did the drilling, right? And we assumed that the Environmental Agency would tackle them seriously. Within 2 or 3 days, we had a result. Go ahead, Quadrilla. So my suspicion, in fact my certainty, is that local views are not going to be heard. And indeed, we see in the papers exactly that. Ministers will not listen if it's simply a question of objecting. But that's not just being protesting. My point is, this technology has many, many crazy complications in it. Things happen which throw things the wrong way. We just had a result of worry about the effect on the Balcombe train tunnel if there were earthquakes, right? A big, serious thing. Now, local people often have the knowledge to point out there are many things you need to consider, but it's not being considered because all that the Environmental Agency does is listen to the oil industry. It doesn't listen. That's my absolute conviction.
So if I pick up the second point, how do we get to renewables, and don't we have to carry on burning some stuff to get there? Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's the classic argument used by those that will want to carry on burning stuff. It's used by the oil and gas industry as much as it is by you wanting to get to renewables and saying how we're going to get there. Well, what I would do is I would point you to what's happening in Europe. I would say look at the fact that one day last year Germany got 50% of its electricity from solar. Germany is not a country you think of as a place to go for a sunny holiday. Okay? Last December, the UK got 10% of its electricity from wind. Despite the fact that Conservative Party MPs and councillors up and down the country have been preventing wind farms from going through planning. Right? That's because we've put quite a lot of offshore wind on. Denmark has got 20% of its electricity from wind for donkey's years, actually for about 20 years already. So there are lots and lots of examples across Europe of renewables coming on tap, and coming on tap very fast. We've got the technology, right? We can do this. It's about willingness, it's about spending the money, it's about political will, really. And one other thing I would say just about methane, I actually have a little bit of a track record in burning methane, but it's a different sort of methane. When I was a councillor, it's not that one, although cows clearly are a very big problem in that situation, which is why we should all eat a little less meat. When I was a councillor in Camden, in London, I introduced the burning of biogas from food waste in Camden vehicles. So 50% of Camden vehicles use biogas from food waste. That seems to me to be acceptable.
I'm going to ask us to move to closing statements. Thank you all for asking questions. If I would like to invite the first speaker with their first closing statement, Ed.
Okay. I know there's a lot of questions that got left out, the answers there, I didn't really want that. To go back to the claim that this water is going to be sat in massive lakes, there might be some parts of the United States where that happens. In Canada. We, over here in the United Kingdom, the government has made it very clear, and I hope we lobby them to honour this kind of pledge, that these pits are going to be closed, they're going to be sitting around, they're going to be tested, they're going to be treated, all subject to some really, really tough environmental regulations.
That's not fair.
Apologise.
Anyway.
Thanks, guys. Back to the
Order.
Okay,
I don't even know where it's going.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, can we respect the debate?
Let him speak. Thanks, guys. Back to the thing on clean water. Yes, we do need to save our clean water. It is precious. But like I said earlier, we have got golf courses using the same amount of water every year as a small town. Okay, golf fan. And finally, yes, it needs to be transparent. Yes, it needs to be regulated. And yes, the local communities have to be compensated. They've said at the moment local communities get 1% of the profit from the drilling if it's successful. I think it needs to go further than that. But
Flashes, oil and gas talking.
Question time's over. Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
I haven't heard anybody in our community saying they want to be compensated. They want Quadrilla out. They do not want it.
Yeah.
So this nonsense about, oh, it's only drilling, there's no fracking. You can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. If you're saying that the experience in which farm in Dorset is important, showing there's no problem, right? You can't then turn it round and say, but it is a problem. In fact, what we're hearing, I'm seeing in this debate, is the same old industry story. Oh yes, it's all going to be protected, there's going to be no problem, there are going to be safeguards. I can say to you that our experience in having dealt with this industry over the last few months is that's nonsense. They're irresponsible, they tell lies, they shift the ground constantly, they keep saying, oh no, it's not fracking, yes it's fracking. They actually told us a few weeks ago that the possibility of going through to production in Balcombe was very small. It wasn't really on. If that be the case, why on earth did they come in the first place? Were their planners so stupid that they didn't realise there's a settlement right there with lots of villagers who fear this technology? And the technology must be feared because you can't control the results. One thing impacts on another thing. For example, what do you do with the mud which you use for drilling? Now, Codrell has had enormous problems with using that mud, exporting that mud in Lancashire. It's stuffed it down holes, it's created earthquakes. It's tried to get it into sewage works, it overused the sewage works. So my view is, don't accept this argument about safeguards. They're not there, they're unimplementable by this government, who after all is busily stripping away the staff of the agencies, so that all they're saying is, industry, oh, do your own self-policing. Well, in Balcombe, we tried that, and all we got was lots and lots of noise, because nobody else could monitor and suppress the noise.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd just like to answer the point that was made about wind farms, and just to let everybody know here today, in administration there's a large wind farm proposal off the Sussex coast. We fully supported that in administration and helped to push it through. I personally believe that we have to look at all options. We have to look at them, we have to understand them, and we have to see how they come forward. Talking about local democracy, I was quite concerned to listen to some of the issues, and I will say this as a local councillor and a previous leader. Local councils planning have a real say in what goes on, and they should make sure their voice is heard. If the issue of mud was not resolved before they actually went on site drilling, why not? Because there's so many ticks and boxes that should happen and be transparent. Sorry, I don't know your council, I don't know who's on your council.
A load of Tories.
Well, there you go. I'm still going to say it because I truly believe in democracy that local councils should check every part that goes forward, and we have done, and that's why I'm not going into the instance of the methane gas we had in the city. It was for something else, but I asked for the land to be tested, and it was, and the proposal that was going to go there didn't happen, because you have to be sure. And the debate around fracking is, you have to be sure this is your future, this country needs energy. From whichever source it's going to come from, we need it. 60 million people rely on it. So, therefore, the debate is around, yes, looking at everything. You can have demonstrations, you can, shout around everything else, but facts speak for themselves. Thank you.
So Mary, I've considered this option quite hard, and I think listening to people here, they consider it quite hard as well. We're not going to accept fracking. It is not an option that we want to see. It's a sign of desperation. That's what it is. It's a sign of desperation. It's the last throw of the dice by the oil and gas industry, and we should stand up and see it for what it is. Right up there with tar sands, right up there with coal bed methane. It's desperation, drilling in the Arctic. We don't want it. What we want is not to be diverted. We need renewables, we need energy efficiency, we need to stop consuming so much energy. We waste so much energy, Mary. It's not just about getting out there and consuming more energy all the time. Ed, the world actually shouldn't be about just consuming more energy. We need to be more cognizant of the fact that we're wasting it. Most of the stuff
Thank you.
we don't need. Right? Most of the energy is going into stuff that we don't need as human beings, I fervently believe. This is not a bridging fuel, this is still a fossil fuel. We burn it, it creates CO2. We leak it, it creates methane, that's 40 times worse than CO2. It's a diversion from what we need to be doing, and I beg you to not support the motion this evening that fracking is a good thing. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I would like to thank a number of people, starting with the 4 people who have spoken to you today. Thank you. I'd like to offer an enormous thanks to UniTV, who have been filming the whole procedures. I believe you'll be able to see the debate online, if you so desire. I would also like to thank the University of Sussex Green Party Society, who organised this debate. I would like to say a few words.
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm the chair of the University of Sussex Green Party Society. I also want to say a big thank you to the Labour Party for coming and helping us out, and I know they've helped us a lot with advertising the event. Again, thanks to the speakers, you were great, and thanks to the Debating Society, who have made us all very impartial and helped us make the day go really, really smoothly. So let's get on.
All those who would support the notion that fracking is a blessing, please raise your hands up high in the air so we can see them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. All those who support the notion that fracking is a curse, hands up. And any abstentions? Okay, good. By overwhelming majority, the curses have it. Thank you.